Hi, welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Haute Couture week in Paris, and yesterday our favorite fashion iconoclast, Demna, presented his latest Haute Couture collection for Balenciaga. I'm joined by some really great industry insiders, and we're going to break down the collection. But before we do so, I would love them to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Joel Gallucks. I'm a content creator and a brand owner.
Hi, I'm Deborah Milner. I'm an artist and couture fashion designer specialising in sustainable couture.
Hi, I'm Hannah Teare. I'm an editor-at-large at Tatler magazine, an art director and stylist.
Hi, I'm Ricky. I'm a creative director and designer of London brand Status.
Amazing. So this is the 53rd couture collection for Balenciaga. It's the 4th by Demna after reopening the couture ateliers after over 50 years of them laying dormant. Balenciaga, since Demna's joined in 2015, has kind of been one of the most divisive brands in fashion. But with that being said, he really transformed it from what it was to this global luxury powerhouse that has a revenue of over 2 billion euros a year. Why do we think people love it as much as they hate it? Maybe start with Joel. I know you're a huge Balenciaga head.
Yeah, obviously I'm quite biased because I'm a huge fan of Demna, from Vetements to Balenciaga. I feel like Demna really shifted the zeitgeist of fashion in general. I feel like with Vetements, it kind of disrupted the whole industry. And he kind of turned everything on its head and made people question what is high fashion. Now sneakers, hoodies, bomber jackets are all considered high fashion. You see them at Louis Vuitton, you see them everywhere. And I feel like Demna played a big role in changing the landscape of high fashion as we see it today. And with that comes critics and fans. So in my eyes, that's he really twisted everything.
I think what Demna has done so incredibly beautifully throughout his career is kind of what almost rock stars do and musicians do, which is create that sense of community. I think from Vetements right through to Balenciaga, he's managed to hold this group of people who have followed kind of his aesthetic and his ideals. And that obviously grows and grows and grows over time. But I think any designer that can curate that level of community that has such a force behind it, that's so wonderful, in my opinion.
He's quite an amazing world builder in how defined this sphere is. It's easy to get into almost.
Especially now when things are so, global. There's so much reach compared to, say, 50 years ago, when it would be a much smaller niche of people who are really seeing what couture designers specifically were doing. It's even more important to create that world and that sense of following.
Well, I thought Demna's kind of Vetements years and then leading into his Balenciaga years really started around the same time that fashion became so democratized because of social media and because of the internet. And we already lived in a global world, but because of the access that we have to each other and to create an online community, he was able to tap into, I guess, a culture, a subculture that
He was
outside of it.
He is a natural disruptor, and I think social media and the way that things have moved globally, that is something that people land on quickly, embrace. It can become mainstream. It sort of trickles through quite quickly now, and high street brands have the power to pivot very quickly as well. So his influence moves really, really fast. But he is naturally that person. I don't think he seeks it in the way that other people do. So it's very authentic.
Yeah. So we agree he is influential, but he's also very controversial.
Yes.
And a lot of people have a lot of issues with Balenciaga. I guess I'll start with aesthetics. What do we think about this aesthetic that he's really pushed since he's joined this streetwear world, this mundane world, this subcultural reverence he has for skaters and punks, and maybe shifting it into a high fashion luxury space?
I think I read an interview, or I read a piece where he was rarely talking, and he used the phrase societal voyeur, which for me, was like such a summary of how he approaches fashion. I think he really enjoys looking at the world around us and feeding that back to us in a high fashion way. But then I think as consumers, we see ourselves in his some of us, not all of us, see ourselves in his elevated version of the world. And I think when you can see yourself in design and fashion, you wish to consume it. And I think it's that simple, in my opinion.
No, I definitely agree. I think when I think about like the criticisms of his ready-to-wear, and we'll get into it with this couture collection, because I think this one is vastly different to his previous three. But that idea of what does luxury look like? Can a t-shirt and jeans and a hoodie be luxury? Where do we stand on that? Honestly.
Honestly, I struggle with that. I think I come from an old school world where sort of romance, I like things to be beautiful. I love it to see, sort of appreciate a craft in a way that perhaps is from a more old school point of view. But I enjoy how confronting I find it, and that it really does make me think. And I have an appreciation for it more, I think, from almost a point of view of it feeling like it's art, as rather than something that comes naturally to me that I can just embrace in the sense that I might have done with a Christian Lacroix couture gown or ready to wear. It's just, the point of view is fascinating, and I like what it creates as a thought process within myself, and I'm sure that is the same for a lot of people.
Deborah?
I mean, it's difficult. I haven't been able to have a really good look at it yet, so I don't want to
Should we start
go
from
back
look
on
one?
myself. But it doesn't look... See, when I see some of these things, I start to change what I'm saying, because they look quite interesting, the black and the blue one.
The blue
two ends.
Exceptional.
And I can't really get close enough to see how well made it is, but that would be something that I would have said, just looking at it cursorily, that it looked like ready-to-wear. And that you could make it as ready-to-wear, so why bother doing it as couture? Because what is there that makes it couture?
Right.
Having said that, I mean, something like that blue one on the right and the black one, you can see in the construction that was obviously more involving. I don't mean that everything has to look super complicated in couture, because it doesn't. But nowadays, you know, you have all these incredible neoprene fabrics. You can make like those t-shirt pieces out of neoprene as ready-to-wear, so there is no point in having it as couture. So that would be something I would say.
Right.
I think some of the aesthetic is interesting, but you know, I like these big drape pieces and the colours on that one, but it doesn't look in the way that it's made like it's couture, which is fine, and that's the whole question then, what is couture? But then, you know, all of those techniques and those petit mains, I think that's something that's worth kind of taking forward. And that doesn't mean that it has to all look like, you know, little neat suits and things like that. I'm not saying that at all, but some of it just doesn't look very well made. So then is it couture if it's not well made? Is that not what couture is? I don't know. So
I think a lot of Demna's work gets misinterpreted at face value, which is so easy to do in today because you just see a picture online, do you know what I mean? But for example, they posted on their Instagram like how it looks like a printed t-shirt. I can't remember which look it is. But it's actually got aluminium within the sleeves to create like a crinkled effect that kind of freezes it.
Right.
And then also the print isn't print, it's hand painted by an artist and took 70 hours to complete. So there are all these elements there. But I know what you mean. Yeah, if you see them, you're like, oh, that's just a t-shirt. But when you actually know the process that has gone into it, that's...
So I guess I would want to say I mean, I get what you're saying about the hand painting, but if I was seeing the piece in real life, I'd want to see if that stood up.
Yes.
If it really did.
Yeah.
If it warranted that, was there any point in doing that, or could you have just printed it and it would be just as good?
An interesting thing to note as well is like, for the images that they've taken of the collection, I'm not sure if it's on their Instagram or on their website, but they've taken them, I think, on a like rotating platform, so you can see like a 360
that would be good.
view.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Because I think a lot of what Cristobal was doing involved a lot of volume and sculpture, and I think Demna's really translated that into his designs, and he wanted to show that so that it's featured like more of a 360 look, because I think it is hard to translate in image and even video sometimes just how much work has gone into a piece.
Yes.
It's easy with like a Schiaparelli kind of gorgeous gown that's so like gold and luxurious. You're like, oh, that's couture.
But not even just that. If you look at those Balenciaga very simple pieces, even just in a photograph,
Yeah.
you can see that that was an incredible construction. Like if we think of one of those white wedding dresses that he did with a sort of slash neck, no sleeves, just a shape,
Yeah,
and it's so perfect.
yeah, very true.
And there wasn't even retouching in the same way in those
It is
days.
now, yeah.
And you know that that construction was all about the way he created a new fabric
Yeah.
and the way that he used it with as few seams as possible to create, you know, the most incredible volume.
Yeah.
So,
But then do you not see that in those like early looks from this collection?
sorry, the early looks.
Early looks
yes,
in
I
this
think,
because he
the early
created
looks-
these amazing hoodies and T-shirts that are structured and they're lined with
Oh, you mean these?
yeah, like these opening looks. Like he's created
But
volume.
you could do
he's
that in
created
ready to wear.
structure.
I don't think
yeah.
that looks like, that isn't made the same way.
I think the
Sorry.
Agree.
Sorry, but I could make,
Oh, yeah.
well, I know I could make that, and it's not, it doesn't look.
But then I guess it also opens up that conversation of what that art mean.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I could have done that, but you didn't.
But you didn't,
You didn't.
yeah.
You didn't
There's
have the
nobody
vision
ever
or
that's done
it.
the inception in your mind to create a
Yeah.
plain gray T-shirt like that in that shape with
Sure.
those proportions.
And then just throwing something in, because it might sound like I'm being very kind of old-fashioned and a real Luddite, not kind of accepting new things. I do think that we're in a real kind of change moment where everything is going to change and is changing, and that this is part of that. And so, you know, it's almost like a transitional kind of collection to wherever we're going next, because it is getting very boring just seeing these corseted gowns with embroidery on. I totally agree with that. So I'm definitely open to thinking about where we're going with it.
It feels like it's his version of couture. It's
Yeah.
it's the layering up of, you know, so much technology within the fabrics and the development. And yes, there is still lots of sportwear silhouettes, and I would agree with you that quite a lot of it does look like it's ready to wear, but and that you would need to assess it up close to really appreciate
Yes, you would.
that. Because I mean, I think in the old school, I was saying the corset, it's very obvious when you're in the room with say what was a Galliano Dior, that you were with almost like a creature, and it was alive in a way. There was so much work in it, and I think for some of these pieces that are very sculpted, you do get a version of that, but it's the same world that we live in now, where there's also Grand Theft Auto and there's this and that.
Yes.
And it is a very, very different time that we're working in. It's his version of the intricacy and the thought process. And so he's sort of echoing that time of the 30s, 40s, 50s, but putting it with, you know, giving it his modern
New codes.
version. Yeah.
And I guess it's also looking towards who are the new couture clients, because we've been stuck with the same kind of demographic for so long, and that's changing as well.
I think that's a great point, because it kind of has opened couture up to so many young people that didn't really know about it or weren't interested in it before, and now they're watching it being like, oh wow, this is so interesting, and it's a whole new audience. And you kind of have to do that, because as generations pass, couture might die out.
Exactly.
So I think what he's doing is really interesting, and it creates a conversation more than anything. So.
Demna said in the show notes that he was looking at subcultures with this, specifically streetwear, goth, skater, metalheads, and trying to, I guess, elevate that into this world of haute couture, a world that historically they've been completely ostracized from, and luxury fashion, which he's also done with ready-to-wear. What are our thoughts on referencing these subcultures in a way like this?
I think it's nice because, like, instantly when I looked at the collection, I saw it and I was like, oh, I'd wear that, I'd wear that, I'd wear that. I went to see, because they had the prices there, I was like, let me have a look. I was like, oh, can't afford that, won't be wearing that. So just as a consumer, it's crazy how we're at a space where there is a brand that is pushing me to even want couture, coming from nowhere where couture is a part of my world. So I think it's interesting that he is definitely tapping into different spaces and people through this kind of work. And I think there's so much nuance in how he approaches it. Like, I think you were mentioning about like the t-shirts and how that's not necessarily complex, but I think the nuance in a lot of his couture is as technically as it may not look, the fabrications, the development of the fabrications that they come up with are so interesting and so technologically led. What he may not do necessarily in instant visual is in the textures themselves. And I love that kind of need to dig deeper into his couture. I think it's almost like there are so many designer Easter eggs that you can unpack in kind of the way he approaches couture, and I like that.
Demna said that there were kind of 4 points from Cristobal's aesthetic with couture that he reinterpreted here. The first being the 3/4 length sleeves, a focus on profile and silhouette and that cocoon shape, eccentric headpieces, and fabric innovation. I was listening to his interview with Kathy Horan from his last couture show, and I get the sense that he does have such a real reverence for couture, but all we see is, well, I think a lot of what people see is his Vêtements days and irony. Do we see irony here? Is this ironic, or is it sincere? Do we think he's a sincere maker?
I think it must be sincere, because you wouldn't put all that effort to doing something that you didn't really believe in.
And it's a continuation of his aesthetic. It truly is. And I mean, it's so obviously his shapes and constructions.
I also feel like couture is a space where a designer can really test the limits and play with their own design ideas, because there's not that pressure of the whole ready-to-wear buy happening.
Yeah. And I guess you don't actually have to sell that many, do you, realistically? It could only take a few kind of, I don't know, rappers or whatever to say they want this and that and the other, and you've already made the quota on those pieces.
Yeah. Sorry, you go.
No, you go.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, so I think it is sincere in that way. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's really interesting that he's taken these codes and reworked them into, like, some of them remind me of like samurai, the way they're layered up. And I find these like proportion building through like what could be deemed as regular clothes, jackets, jeans, and creating these like armor-esque figures is stunning. And for me, where it really these like reworked recycled pieces, I think when sustainability is still such a huge question, I'd love to know if these are made from dead stock or if they're going to continue to produce them from dead stock, because if we're now producing couture with dead stock, I think that's quite incredible.
The show notes said that a few of the pieces did use fabric scraps from the atelier to create some of these looks.
And I think that's beautiful if he carries on using these leftover textures to create these pieces. Like, it's very sincere, in my opinion.
Were there any standouts in this collection, or anything that we were like, that's blasphemous to couture? I hated the belt dress.
Which
one?
The one that was just like Balenciaga army belts.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
I didn't love
Tank
that.
girl.
Wasn't my favorite.
Yeah.
Two looks have kind of stood out to me. I mean, I love the hats with like that look like
too.
t-shirts have been thrown over them or something.
I love that. I think it reminded,
Jellyfish.
I don't know, it felt very evocative for me. I'm a former Hot Topic goth, so seeing that kind of aesthetic really refined and elevated to the height of fashion, it like sparked something in me that made me like just a tad emotional.
I really liked the faux fur ensemble. I don't know if it's a dress or a coat, maybe it's a coat, with the blue butterfly. I thought that was really cool. And the look next to it.
Yeah, me too. I love that one.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And the one next to it with the black butterfly mask that just looks like, like a band tee. I thought that was really cool. Those two kind of stood in my mind, like stuck out to me.
There's a black glittered dress that has like some deconstruction. That's just
With the pointy bits, and you know up close what those crystals in real life, and the weight of that dress would just be so impressive.
This one, Look 21.
Oh, yeah.
I just think it's so beautiful.
It's really cool.
Oh, actually, mine was further down. It was a strapless one, but yeah, I know the fabric. I thought that they were incredible pieces.
I just love that intersection of like, it's gothy, but it's a stunning gown. I'm sure that fabric is absolutely exquisite up close, but the way it's been reworked and styled almost just feels so
It's modern Morticia.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
it's sick. I love it.
I really like the bright blue, actually, just as the jacket coat.
That coat, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love this one too, but from a sort of shooting, say, in a more classical way, this would be one of the pieces that I would have landed on, and there were about 6 pieces that still gave you that nod to a more traditional evening wear, but have enough of a really fabulous twist or something that goes a little bit superhero that is kept within his world as well. But yeah, that blue one there I felt also very much echoed some of those Balenciaga sculptural shapes. And I feel up close that you could appreciate that, as you were saying about the cutting and how that would.
Number 25 is pretty amazing.
So that blue coat, I think, is probably the best example of fabric innovation in this collection. The show notes say that this trompe l'oeil fur was made out of synthetic hair that's shaped, hand-dyed by hairstylist Gary Gilles, and took 2.5 months to make. How fab.
Yeah, and the scrap fur dress, which was the I think that was like 7.5 weeks. That is you just know that up close that would be absolutely exquisite.
Which
the
one
work
was
and all
that
the herringbone. It is
The one we were just talking about.
the one we were just talking about. Hang on. It's not that she stood to the side.
Oh, not that one?
No. I think it's much nearer the bottom. And so what they were using so traditionally fur houses would use all the little scraps and create those coats that gave you that were much more kind of busy, so that there would be no waste. And in this case, he's using faux fur and kind of representing that as a medium in the herring. Do you remember you get the herringbone? Yeah. So that's the dress. Sorry, I just can't see it at the moment. I think it's further down. And that, that's a really interesting approach.
Yes.
It's this one.
Oh, right, okay.
You can't really tell.
No, you can't
that
tell
here,
on here.
But you really can't. But when you go into the details, you can see all the work, and it's really, really clever. And that last piece, 39, is the one that I think it's 47 meters of fabric.
Wow.
And it takes 30 minutes to put it on and 30 seconds to take it off, and you can only wear it once. So that, for all his recycling, reworking, that's all.
I think they literally wrapped.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, I was thought maybe it disintegrated or something.
What do we think about this finale dress? I think it's an obvious reference to a.
I like it in a funny way.
Christina, can we go to that another page with the Cristobal Balenciaga archive couture looks? Another mag. That one, yeah.
Yeah.
It was right there. Scroll down.
At the bottom, yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
So, what do we think of that as a reference and how it was executed here for 2024?
I prefer the original, if I'm honest. The original still feels so elegant. And
we do
but I do like the other one.
Me too.
But I don't. It's.
I do.
Technically, it doesn't look anything. Doesn't have any of the beauty of that one, but I do actually quite like it as a concept and
Me too. Well,
the way it looks, if that makes sense.
I think standing in each of them, you would feel a very different woman or a very different man, because I would say that this one would elevate you more into a certain world of elegance, and the other one, you are an art piece. It's confronting, and it's exciting. Like, you would enter the room and everyone would look in a very different way to how they would if you were there in that. And they're both brilliant, but it's...
What my issue with it is, and I think that's only because of the tag Balenciaga, otherwise I don't think it would be relevant. But I think that Balenciaga was such an incredible cutter.
Yes.
And that Demna has loads of amazing skills, but I don't think that's what the skills are that he's presenting. That's my view.
It shows you the cutting, doesn't it?
Yeah, the cutting is incredible.
It's exquisite.
And that doesn't mean that Demna's cut isn't exciting or relevant or grabbing people's attention or exactly what we should be looking at now. But it just doesn't have that level of expertise. And that you can't deny that. Even if it looks amazing, it's just not got that. But why would it have? It's a different time.
Still.
Right. Ricky, you had a visible reaction.
This face of mine. I think Demna is a masterful cutter.
I agree.
I think it would be unfair, considering the width and breadth of his work over both brands to deny his ability to cut. I think the garments, if we're going to compare the original dress to the reinterpretation, I think Demna did with it exactly what Demna would do with it, which is wrap that romanticism up in maybe some aggression and kind of maximize it in a very minimal way, if that makes any sense at all. But I think what he does so beautifully with these collections is he lets you know that he's very aware of Cristobal, but he doesn't beat you over the head with it. Because what we would do then, we'd sit here and be like, all he does is copy the archive.
That's true.
Yeah,
And it's just kind of like, at what point can he be free to like meet those crossroads and just be praised for that? I think out of a lot of people who take on houses, he's one of the designers that I would say has mastered referencing alongside his own aesthetic very beautifully.
I agree.
I think the main differences between Cristobal and Demna are that Cristobal was like you said, a perfectionist.
Yeah, maybe that's the word.
And I think Demna, I think he's even said himself in interviews that he kind of prefers the rough and ready kind of style of things. So I think that's the part where their kind of design ideas clash a little. But like you were saying, I still think Demna's been able to translate Cristobal's work and reference it in an amazing way that we kind of see that today, and it's not too over the head,
I mean, I guess compared to someone like Nicolas Ghesquière, who everyone loved what he did at Balenciaga, but actually that had no relevance to the original Balenciaga, even if it was great and reinvented the brand. Whereas you can say, as you're saying, that Demna is referencing the brand, and you can see the codes there, even if you don't agree about execution or whatever, and that might be a pointless thing anyway, as you're saying.
His first couture collection was very like paying homage to Cristobal. Like we saw a lot of kind of copies, but like the same kind of silhouettes, different dresses. Whereas after, I feel like once he'd said, okay, I'm going to redo couture, I'm going to start it again, and now I'm going to show you my style.
Yeah.
Which I think he's doing.
Which is why I think this collection is actually quite interesting to look at. I think he did the same thing with ready-to-wear. When he joined, it took him a few seasons before we started seeing the oversized t-shirts down the runway and the ripped jeans.
Yeah.
And when those collections happened, I think it was 2017, 2018.
Is this ready to wear?
This is couture. This is
okay.
the second one he did.
Oh, okay, yes, I can see.
But the first three he did felt, I thought, a lot more of an homage to Cristobal, or at least more of a aesthetic, obvious homage. And he really played with glamour in a way that couture kind of needs or yearns for. And I think this one is a lot less glamorous.
I think Demna's really like clever at being like, I'm going to show you I can do this, and then I'm going to do me again. He kind of dips in between. He's very aware of, I think, the commentary around his work, and he does lean into showing you his technical skills and prowess, and then goes back into what he knows and loves and maybe wears more in his own life. So,
Do we want to see more of this in couture? Do we want to see more people kind of, I guess, have that reverence for the craft, but do it in a way that's
I think
maybe
we have to,
challenging?
actually, because I do think things are at a point where we need to change, where things have to move forward. You can't really cling on to that kind of look, as long as we're, from my point of view, continuing to value craft and look at new ways to develop that and new techniques, then I think it can't stay the same anyway.
I'm always surprised when I go online and I see fashion commentators, casual fashion lovers, really show their conservative side when it comes to someone like Demna. All of a sudden, the rules of fashion are so rigid that they feel angry when they see this. People like want to fire him from Balenciaga. People are like, this couture is over, couture is dead, like fashion's dead. Why do we think people get so riled up about couture?
people are bored. No, because it's like the minute he stops doing what we know of him to do, will be the moment everyone erupts and be like, oh, it's not the same, I wish it was like this. We have a really hard time in letting people explore their own aesthetic, I think, in design. And I think we get really caught up in always saying what we think someone should do until they do something different and then we complain.
Yeah, very true.
But I think it's good to be able to sit here and have an open discussion, because you might change, you know, my mind about how maybe I was looking at it. And I think that's really interesting to hear what you've got to say. And I'm trying to think, what was the thing that the reason that I didn't immediately warm to it? And I think it has to be something to do with the finish. Not the styling so much, because I agree that it's exciting and interesting to do something else. It's maybe to do with the finish and how does that relate to couture. Maybe that's what I'm not quite getting. And maybe I'm wrong about that anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that's the question that he does kind of want you to ask as well, because it's like, well, what is couture really?
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember the exact rules of it, but I think he's sticking to them. So it technically is couture. Do you know what I mean? But like,
He's part of the Balenciaga is part of the federation. They aren't offended by it, at least not yet. And I think a funny footnote is that Cristobal himself was never a part of that bureaucracy.
yeah, he wasn't.
He was,
No, he was
the
very
master of
disruptive.
us all,
Yeah.
yet he didn't prescribe to.
And he didn't show his collection because he felt people were copying and all that. So
He was anti-press, anti-bureaucracy, which I think almost mirrors sometimes how Demna approaches and views fashion. Again, plays up that kind of reverence they have for each other.
Yeah.
Or at least I like to think.
They're similar in more ways than I think people credit him for.
I mean, I think it's really refreshing as well to have this as an option, because for I don't know, 15, 20 years, the only really sort of artful and creative, really disruptive, dare I say it again, would be Victor and Rolf. We had them, and then everybody else was much more classic, sort of princess perfection, and there is still a massive school of people out there that think of couture as only being princess perfection and will always buy from your Elie Saabs, and they themselves are the exquisite dresses, but it's really important to have other elements represented, because society has gone to such extremes now, and yeah, I mean, this is...
Mind you, everything
it's
they
a bit
made
toy
was
box,
exquisitely made,
Yes, they
to
do.
say.
Yeah.
But also the exploration of couture for men. I think, like...
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's a main point that actually we didn't touch on, which is surprising to me, that this collection, the first half of it, was menswear, or what we think
We
traditionally
didn't
of
even really
menswear.
think.
He's done so much more
That's
menswear
interesting, isn't it?
than others within couture. I mean, he really started doing it, didn't he?
But notice how we're so set into his way of thinking that we didn't even see it as a standout that he's doing couture for men. We just accept it. And I think it's incredible that in such a structured part of our industry like couture, that he can come in and be like, oh, we're doing this now. And we're all just like, great, thank you.
That's right.
It doesn't even cross our minds.
Excellent. Yes.
And
And then Valentino follows, and then they're all sliding into a sort of 10% themselves.
and then I have no
menswear.
money.
Yeah.
However, in the first 3 couture collections, there was men's tailoring, whereas in this collection, I noticed there isn't any tailoring in a sense. That's some of my
Yes,
favorite
that's true.
stuff by Demna, so I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't
Not
any.
have a real badass kind of slasher
Yeah.
suit in it. Yeah, they
I
were
wonder if
incredible.
that's a directive from the customer. Maybe what the sales may be dictated from his couture clients.
Well, I think that's a good point to go to our first question from social media, who said, this is from @JacobXNawaki. Are you bored of the same ideas constantly being recycled by Balenciaga? This was something that I saw recurring, that Demna has done this before, he does this every season, let's refresh it. But I found this refreshing,
Yeah.
Yes.
or I found it an elevation of what he's presented before.
I think people really drive that into Demna at Balenciaga, but when other designers do it, they don't really pull anyone up on it. And everyone has their own signature style.
Yeah.
He references, like goth, skater vibes all the time. He's bringing that into couture. He's doing it in different ways. I think what I was saying earlier about seeing images online and just taking it for face value, scrolling past it and being like, oh, it's the same. Whereas actually, if you take 5 minutes to just kind of research it a bit, find out more what goes into each collection and each look, you do realize that there are differences.
There's also a lot of younger brands. There's a lot of newer brands as well that I think are kind of taking cues and building on that Demna aesthetic and ideology at the moment. So I find it always very interesting that for some reason this question of aesthetic really does get drummed into him, particularly when I think the aesthetic that he created is very alive and well with a lot of different design at the moment.
You can't do something, I was going to say you can't do something different every season, but then this collection is very different to his other couture collections.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe he just felt confident now that he could bring that aesthetic through more fully to the couture.
This is a question from @TheRealBinReaper. $30,000 hoodie, question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. What are our thoughts on that? Taking these kind of wardrobe mundane staples and putting them in this not only a luxury fashion context, but a couture context.
It's obviously for a certain kind of client and person that can afford
Someone's
that.
buying it.
Yeah.
And they want to, is what I was saying.
The other thing that's interesting is that couture clients often nowadays, they don't want to have fittings.
It's
So
really
you've
interesting.
suddenly got to make whatever it is, a dress or whatever, and it's got to fit them perfectly, but they don't want to have a fitting. So you could see that there's quite a few pieces in this where you really wouldn't need to have a fitting other than some key measurements, which I think does cater to a new couture client, because that's one of the things that I find most frustrating.
I mean, I would too. I think that's, it's one of
They
those
pay all that
elements
money for
makes
something
couture
and they don't want
couture.
any fittings, and you've somehow got to make it incredible and fit without even putting a pin anywhere.
So it's not that it's a hoodie, it's how the hoodie's made.
Yeah, and it's desired. Some people desire because there is the price tag is what it is as well, or it puts them in a certain club or a certain way that they're perceived, whether it's by their friends or that within that magazine article that it's described that they're in this thing, or whatever. I mean, there's an ownership of a certain way of life as well. I think that can represent.
Also, maybe this is going slightly off piece, but maybe there's another thing where, the whole thing with body consciousness. This is a collection where you wouldn't necessarily have to be stick thin and, massively toned to wear. I mean, of course, there's pieces where you might want to be, but it doesn't really cater to that, which I think is quite positive, really.
Yeah. Another one is, where is Balenciaga headed in the next 10 years? And do we think we're getting close to Demna's expiry date? Are we still captivated?
Yes.
I am.
Yeah. And I think the internet needs to get into the habit of respecting people's crafts. Like, no one has an expiry date. Everyone is doing their best. Relax. And if he decides to leave Balenciaga, I'm sure they'll go on to do something wonderful, and I'm sure he'll go on to do something wonderful. So I think this question of building this, we built Demna up as a figure in this industry. This need to tear him down with words like expiry. It's kind of inhuman, I think.
I think it's the way that the conglomerate system has rotted a lot of our brains.
Isn't it?
A 3-year contract, that's never enough time for anyone to build a world. It's 1 in 100 people are capable of doing that. And when they do build this world, our constant need for new, for refresh, for excitement means completely throwing them to the side.
And everything ebbs and flows. I mean, if you look at McQueen, when I was working with him, some of the seasons would be amazing, and then there'd be other seasons where literally he didn't really do anything, and Sarah and the team would do it all. So I actually made that piece for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Actually, that one and that one.
Light flex.
That was...
There's space for his aesthetic, so whether it's there or go somewhere else, just like you see with Alessandro Michele. He's just on the Valentino collection, but it's Alessandro Michele, because it looks no different in my mind, really, to the many, many collections that he turned out at Gucci. That's his aesthetic. There will be a space and a desire for his work, even if it isn't there. But my personal feeling is that he's not going anywhere right now. And I think they're very happy too. Otherwise, you know, there was an opportunity, say, 18 months ago where they could have definitely, you know, when he could have been jogged on and he wasn't. And everybody had decided that it was a good relationship still and that things would continue creatively. So.
Well, I think now more than ever, these brands are kind of hegemonizing their aesthetics to be as marketable, to reach as much of an audience as possible. That, I mean, I yearn for a real distinct point of view for someone who has something to say.
I think that's one of the things that's got to change because it's got so boring. You really almost don't care who goes where because it's just kind of churning round and round.
Merry-go-round, yeah. What do you call it? Musical chairs.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on Demna's 53rd Haute Couture collection for Balenciaga?
I think it's beautiful. I think people need to stop asking him to be something that he isn't and appreciate the intense craftsmanship and design that goes into what he does do. That's my thought.
I'm enjoying it more that we're talking more and more about it.
Amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. I would cherry pick my favourites, but actually those have expanded for sure over this conversation. Really
it's
enjoyed
definitely
it.
been really interesting to hear everyone's points of views and also some of the things that perhaps I hadn't noticed, just having a cursory look beforehand.
Even I think I've warmed more to the collection the more that I've discovered and read online about it, because like you're saying at face value, or it's like, oh, but that's just a t-shirt. But then when I was reading and being like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, it really makes you think about everything. And I think that's the beauty of Demna's work. So yeah.
And it doesn't look like anything else, and that's definitely a positive.
Yeah, very fresh.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you guys for tuning in. And before you send us any hate in the comments, read more about the collection. It's really fantastic. Bye. Have a great couture week.